Is anyone else having like the links being broken on the calendar invite, or is that just me? Like not being links anymore.
I had a strange thing happen yesterday, but I think they're moving to the LFX Zoom, if I'm not mistaken.
I assume that's on the cards at some point. I haven't heard anything about it though.
Yeah, neither have I. I just saw things moving, so that's why I assumed.
So I've just popped the notes link in the chat. Please add yourself as you can so that we know who came.
Could someone please post a link to the agenda to the chat really quickly? I missed it if it's already been posted.
No worries. There you go. I'll post it a few more times as we get set up. Give it a few more minutes before we kick off.
We were on the wrong call, y'all. Sorry.
Yeah, we were on the SIG meeting call. Apparently they have the SIG meeting call on the calendar, even if it's not. Yeah. I'm just gonna sit in the SIG meeting call on my other screen just to like in case people join.
Oh, is the link mixed up, is it?
Yeah, well,
This meeting is being recorded.
yeah. All right, I'm just gonna sit here and I'll be in the other call in case somebody else uses the wrong link.
Interesting. All right, we'll have to talk to operations about that.
Yep.
All right, one last posting of the link to the notes, and I think we can kick off. Welcome everybody to the EMEA friendly meeting. Feels like it's been a month. That's a lame joke. The first thing, sort of order of business is who would like to keep the notes? We usually look for a sacrificial volunteer.
I'll sacrifice myself this time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For your contribution, Laurie, which takes us elegantly to new faces. Is there anybody who would like to introduce themselves who might not have been here before or hasn't been here for a while?
Hi there, I'm Adam. I'm a product manager at JFrog. So the first time meeting you all, so nice being here.
Welcome.
And also joining with me is Zohar.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, I'm Niels. I work at Packagist and help maintain Composer in the PHP world. And yeah, it's been a few months since I was last on a meeting. Yeah, I was interested in the security audit for repos, so spoke to Jonathan the other day and figured I should maybe join another call once in a while anyway.
Cool. Any other new faces?
Hey everyone, I'm Jenny. I haven't been
in one of these meetings in a while, but yeah, I'm at Shopify and I work in the Ruby Gems repository.
Yay, nice to see you, Jenny. Okay. All right, I think that's all the new faces unless I've missed anybody. Which means we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is, I just wanted to bring people's attention. You might probably have already seen this, but I thought it was really exciting. PyPI have announced that they're going to require MFA for all accounts. Yeah, it's great news. You know, we've all sort of been standing at the water's edge with a toe in the water, but PyPI look like they're going to dive in. So bravo, I say. I'll be very interested. I don't see anybody from PyPI today, I don't think, who could talk about it. But I'm very much looking forward to their sort of reporting back about their experience and what went well and what didn't, and what was hard and what was easy. Because we sort of hypothesized in the past about what that would look like, but nobody's done it yet. So I'm looking forward to learning more from PyPI about how it goes.
Did NPM do something similar, or was it GitHub that required 2FA on all of the GitHub accounts?
GitHub will be requiring it for all accounts by the end of this year. So they're rolling it out in cohorts.
Cool.
Which is also really exciting. Like that kind of like, to me, that raises the waterline for almost all of open source. Like almost everybody, you know, or at least half of the universe of open source will now have familiarity with MFA and have some sort of a setup for it. So I think it will make it much easier for like the increment for a package repository to ask for MFA to be applied across the board will be much smaller. You know, it's a smaller delta than it was previously. That's what I had. I was wondering if there were any comments or questions or any thoughts.
We had previously discussed this idea of like a shared help desk, and one of the driving forces behind that was, as websites enable MFA, they often see an increase in support requests around account recovery. I didn't know if there was a thread there to pick up about ways that this group could help enable more registries to enable MFA for all users.
Yeah, I was hoping to quiz some PyPI folks about that today. To sort of get their sense. Like one thing that gets mentioned in that blog post is they were talking about the support burden of dealing with malicious packages and account takeovers. So it might be that they're reckoning is that the net account burden, like the net support burden, is reduced. And definitely I want to see if their experience bears that out. That would be a very useful input if we decide to return to the question of the shared help desk.
Not necessarily the best from a financial perspective, but I know that Apple, for one of their programs, is requiring that when you sign up for the program with a hardware token, they say you have to have 2 hardware tokens so that if you lose one, you have a backup. So at least for hardware tokens, the industry might be something that we push towards, you know, requiring two YubiKeys or two hardware tokens when you're signing up, just so that if you lose one, you're not, you know, screwed. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was working on the documentation for the MFA rollout on Ruby Gems, that was at least a strong recommendation. We basically pointed out like you ought to have 2 devices if you're using WebAuthn in case one gets lost. Or, you know, breaks for whatever reason. Your phone gets bricked by a creative update, that sort of thing.
Are any of the other platforms represented on this call interested in enabling MFA for all of their users, or have roadblocks or questions or things that we could do to support them in that endeavor?
I'm happy to share what that looks like for us, but I mean, interested, sure. Obviously, it would be a good move. I think the roadblock there is kind of a workflows and requirements so that organizations can properly manage multiple accounts to share ownership. And I think that's kind of what we have a insufficient amount of support for right now, so that there are a number of organizations that prefer to use a shared email address that they can use like account recovery on, etc. So that multi-factor authentication just doesn't work well if a single account is shared, which obviously not a great practice anyway, but requires quite a bit of work around to make it feasible to not do that.
Is there, so I don't really understand the PHP ecosystem that well. It's been a while. So Packages, is that a commercial operation that supports Composer, or is that like an organization? I'm not sure I understand the relationship.
So there's Packages, the company, which is a commercial organization of 5 people. So in that sense, yes, commercial, very tiny. So it's still kind of somewhat community supported, lots of community contributions to actually maintain it. So I guess a mix of both.
Yeah, because it's not a huge amount of work, but it's also not a tiny amount of work to get.
Yeah, it's definitely on the list there, but it's just kind of, I mean, basically people are happy with how it works right now. So I guess it's like to actually make people then transition, like you need to actually build this in a way where it's very seamless. And
I think one thing to learn from PyPI and to some extent from Ruby Gems has been that you sort of like aim to introduce some sort of MFA support first. And then ideally you set up what PyPI called trusted publishers. And in Ruby Gems, I'm not sure what it's going to be called, but basically accepting an OIDC token and returning a push token that's got about 15 minutes on it. So that handles the automated case with the same sort of level of assurance.
Yeah. So I mean, Packages does have MFA. Like it's not like you can't use it. It's just it's not a requirement because there are use cases that we don't really provide a good alternative for that don't work well with MFA.
Do you have an API token approach? Sorry to cut you off.
Again, no, it doesn't really matter for Packages because you can't push code to Packages. So that works a bit differently than all the other ecosystems. You don't actually push code to the registry. The registry pulls the code from your respective code repository because PHP doesn't usually do build processes for libraries.
Right.
So the source code is actually literally what you get when you install the package.
Interesting.
It's similar to NPM though, but NPM hosts it, right?
Well, yeah, but NPM actually has a process of getting from the code to like the file that is distributed, versus in our case where they're literally the same. And so you're like, this gets us around a lot of potential security issues, but has like a few usability differences on the other side.
Yeah, I would add just from NPM a couple things. Like we do have all sorts of build processes that people can have, and the publish process involves putting that into a tarball and then publishing that to our registry. So that, you know, more like any of the other registries, not like what's being talked about from Python, from PHP. The other one I'll add really quickly is like we have not had the ability to prioritize OIDC or kind of like, you know, short-lived tokens, and how we solve that is by having what we call we have 2 different token types. We have a automation token and a granular access token. Those token types allow you to publish without 2FA. They work somewhat like a service account. Essentially, with the granular access token, you can scope that token to specific packages. So that will only have access to the limited resources that are defined there. And then on the packages configuration itself, you can specify that, like, you know, you allow this type of token or you disallow this type of token to only allow publish without 2FA if it is from this kind of token type. You know, longer term, I think there's a desire to move towards OIDC, but it's been a little bit complicated to prioritize that. And regarding the MFA, I guess the one thing that I'd call out, because you were talking more about like org management and that kind of stuff, we have org management on NPM. The biggest problem that we've had with rolling out enforcement, and why we're not right now looking at doing anything more than we did of kind of like the highest subset of our customers, is just the amount of support traffic that we get for account recovery and the amount of edge cases there are. And we even now are still having to adapt our process because we don't want to make like carve outs or exceptions. But the reality is that people are losing their password and their MFA, which in my opinion puts their accounts in like an unrecoverable state. And then that makes for unhappy people. And in the case of businesses, yeah, you could have all of the org management controls you want. People are still going to keep it on their personal accounts. They're still not going to manage it properly. They're still going to lose the keys to the castle, and then you're going to be managing all of these exceptions through support tickets. I'd have to look at our dashboard, but it's measured in hundreds of tickets a week for our population. So it's a pretty significant undertaking. We have 4 full-time support agents that a good majority of their time is spent just doing account recoveries.
Really? So, okay, one of the ones that I saw that was really interesting was when I signed up for a Burp Suite account, right? When you create your Burp Suite account, Burp Suite does something that I've never seen in the industry other than this. They say, here is your password, store it in your, like, you don't give them a password, you don't set a password. They say, here's your password, put it in your password vault. And then, like, it's not a password that you could reasonably remember. And that just, it's a forcing function on, like, you know, you should have a password manager for your password.
Yeah, we also give people recovery codes. You can tell people to do things as much as you want. The reality is they don't.
Yeah, fair.
Do you have analysis of do you have analysis of how many of the legit restore password requests and how much are the people trying to steal credentials? Because it's very interesting to steal credentials in NPM, of course.
I'm sorry, that was a little hard to
I was wondering if people were trying to steal credentials, or are they legitimate password account recoveries?
the majority of them are legitimate account recoveries. We have a pretty intensive process that involves multiple factors of identity verification in order to validate and recover the account. We have had some cases of people trying to do like social engineering. Unfortunately, some that also were successful and were very creative. Those were like creative red teams. But for the most part, I would argue this is not scientific. I'd have to look at actual numbers, but I would say 99% of them are legitimate recoveries. And it's more often that we're not able to recover someone who is obviously the legitimate account holder because we can't verify their identity. That happens a lot more than people who are malicious trying to get access to accounts.
Have you published anything about the actual attempts to social engineer you? Because I know that back when Adam Baldwin was running NPM, there was a lot of blog posts about like security incidents from NPM. Did you guys publish those for the social engineering attempts that have succeeded? Or is that public in any way? I'm just curious.
I'd have to double check. I'm not sure what we made public or didn't make public there.
No, I just feel like that'd be a fascinating story to read through and understand. So if you guys do have that and you were willing to share it, would love to see that posted in the Slack channel.
Mm-hmm.
No pressure though. I know that's probably a sensitive topic too.
Yeah, it can be sort of difficult to say we got socially engineered, but not want to talk too much about.
You usually don't want to get into the specifics, but what I could say is that part of us having an explicit process with clear steps, including the fact that knowledge of password is now like mandatory to begin account recovery, has significantly raised the bar and minimized the circumstances where social engineering was happening. And I would say, like, truthfully, that like, and I will share this because I don't think that it's like too much of an issue. There was the known issue with like email addresses and the challenge with like domain expiration. And I would say the one successful social engineering attack that I'm aware of happened due to the domain expiration attack.
Yeah,
and that was very hard to notice, and we have things in place now that we don't really talk about too extensively because then people could get around it, but we have things in place to identify like the domain expiration attack and put notes on accounts and force additional measures of identity verification for accounts that we think fall into that category. But the off the top of my head, the only successful social engineering one that I can think of was one where someone did the domain expiration attack.
Well, thank you for sharing. There's a doc that's Zach. Thanks, Zach.
Oh, that was an interesting conversation. Exactly the sort of conversation we sort of envisaged when we set it up. Really cool. Jonathan, you're next. You wanted to talk about the great audit.
Yeah, and Zach, this ties into your meta point of what would people like to get out of this working group. This is what I'd like to get out of this working group, is this initiative off the ground and into the skies. So I sent out an email to, I presume that a lot of you are here because of my call to arms of sorts. I sent out emails to all of the security at email addresses for let's see, I think I did Gradle, Conan Center, Maven Central, Ruby Gems, PyPI, Golang, Cargo, Docker, NuGet, and Packagist. I didn't do Drupal or Alary because I don't know the email for Alary, and I don't know that they are used enough. And then Drupal, I had a chat with Nils about whether or not that's relevant or not. But I sent out an email to all of the different packaging ecosystems saying, hey, this is an initiative. Here's the document. Would love to see you all involved. Does this interest you? It seems like generally I've gotten a lot of positive feedback and interest in this proposal. High level, has anybody not read through this proposal?
So we have Lewis on from Conan Center, and I'm pretty sure he has not read through the proposal since I just spoke with him yesterday about this.
That would be correct, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, let me just give you the high level sort of, high level, I'm basing my presumption on the concept, the basis that because major artifact servers, right, like central repository servers, right, like Maven Central, NPM, all the ones that we represent here, are usually a cost center and not something that a company sells. It's likely that this service has never had a pen test done to it, because a forcing function for requiring a security audit is usually a purchasing agreement that another firm has that says we're not going to purchase this unless you have had an audit. And because that forcing function, that market force, has never existed, it's likely that a lot of them have not. Also for community run artifact servers, Ruby Gems, PyPI, stuff like that, there's probably not been enough money in the industry to actually pay for an audit. And so I would like to change that. I'd like to actually, I know as the OpenSF, we're talking about like SigStore, and we're talking about all these other solutions for securing open source, but I'd like, can we deal with the basics? Can we start at the beginning? And so the proposal here is let's get a pen test done. And also, while we're at it, let's also hire a red team to engage in actual social engineering potentially against each one of these artifact servers, and then talk about it, right? Let's let's talk about the vulnerabilities uncovered and include that. Not necessarily the red team stuff, because that's a little more sensitive. I think that we should disclose the impact and that what impact they were able to achieve, and that the test happened for the red team, but not necessarily the full details. But for the technical ones, because those are vulnerabilities that have been found and fixed, I'd love to see most of those reports published. The high level is that for community run repositories, PyPI, Ruby Gems, the initiative, we would pay for both the pen test and the red team engagement, and also a contractor or someone to spend time fixing this vulnerability. Either the organization says, this is the person we want you to fund, can you fund them? Or we would offer them a contractor. For corporate run ones, that it'll be a little different. We would either say, hey, we'd love to see a red team engagement test, and also a retest result with the fixes. If you want to pay for it, you as a corporation want to pay for it, we'll give you 180 days to do that. if you'd like us to pay for it, then the disclosures that come with that will follow the 90-day disclosure timeline that the OpenSF has for disclosure. The one thing that's a little different, just as a carve out, I don't know if any of you, if all of you have read the policy for vulnerability disclosures with OpenSF. The one thing that's slightly different is there's a caveat. Here, where is it? Caveat. Funding. Caveat. All vulnerabilities disclosed during the course of the technology audit will be bound by the OpenSF outbound vulnerability disclosure policy with one change. While the pen test firm may disclose vulnerabilities immediately upon discovery of to the target, the OpenSF outbound vulnerability disclosure policy notice date, which is the start of the disclosure deadline, will be 1 business day after the scheduled pen test concludes, not including the retest. So that lets the report, you start getting reports earlier, and then from there, the 90 days will occur. So, yeah, at a high level, we're looking for funding. I've spoken, nobody's committed to anything. Michael Scovetta from Alpha Omega, I work for Alpha Omega, by the way, has said that he could probably put in like half of the proposed amount from Alpha Omega, but we're looking for potentially other organizations to step in and help fund this proposal, either Open Source Security Foundation or other entities to come in and assist. We're also going to be working with OSTIF on this as well. Yes, Zach.
Yes, well, we've talked about this topic before, but like, I love what's at the core of this proposal, which is like, how do we turn OpenSSF dollars into meaningful security improvements for package ecosystems? I'm not sold on the chain of reasoning by which we get to that point. For example, the Python Software Foundation put together this list of fundable package improvements years ago. This is how MFA was implemented in PyPI via a grant from an external party. This is how scoped API tokens was implemented in PyPI via an external party. And so, we're sort of like, we're constructing this process by which, we aren't sure if security risk assessments have happened on package managers because that type of information isn't, typically disclosed publicly. And so we're saying, well, we have to do the risk assessment in order to, kind of construct the fundable improvements. I don't think that's the case, though. I think we could work with different package management ecosystems and say, hey, in the event that you haven't done a risk assessment, we can help you with that, surely. But I would be more interested in working with teams who manage package repositories, who often already know where the security skeletons lie, and putting together sort of high-level project descriptions of like what could be done in their ecosystem to improve security. What's the scope of those projects, approximately how much do they cost, et cetera.
So you're saying, like, instead of doing the security pen test, go to them and say, where do you need funding to improve your security overall, and go where their skeletons are buried, instead of asking an external firm to perform the audit to figure out where the skeletons are?
Yes, like I wouldn't say don't do a risk assessment in any case. Like, there may be a case where a package manager says, like, yes, actually that is what we need, is a risk assessment. However, I think that in many cases, these platforms already have an idea of where their security shortcomings are, and we could just write that list down and then take that to the OpenSSF, or take it to CISA, or other bodies that might be interested in writing checks, and use that to deliver those security improvements.
I think personally, as somebody who's kind of interested in this audit for their package registry, I think those are two separate problems, and I think both of those need funding.
Yes.
Yes, I'm absolutely aware of issues where, like, overall, we could build new features to improve security. We could, build certain things, like make changes that would improve security. But at the same time, I'm also entirely aware that, we may not actually know of all the issues that exist. And where specifically, the point of pen testing is not to identify what you could know yourself, but to figure out the things that you overlooked and that you weren't aware of. So I think those are very much complementary efforts, and I don't think it makes sense to stop one to do the other.
I mean, for example, one of the things that I'm thinking about is we as security practitioners, right, we can understand the scope of the attack vector for our artifact servers. But is a bunch of research that's come out of like Portswigger and discussed at Black Hat and stuff like that around like HTTP request splitting, right? And the impact of that is that you can poison a request that comes back and hijack the response and then like inject your own data into the response that's going to somebody else's request, like somebody else's request for potentially an artifact. Usually it's against web servers, stuff like that, right? That's something that we as security practitioners may be aware of, but may not know how to test for. And it's only somebody that has the knowledge of how to go after that sort of vulnerability and test for that sort of thing that's going to unveil that actually you are vulnerable to this, and you need to consider fixing this sort of thing. And I think there's a bunch of other sort of classes of vulnerabilities that exist in the web sphere and not in the web sphere that someone sitting down with an attacker mindset very clearly is going to get and drill into that will help inform that decision of what priorities need to get taken care of, in what order.
I can't speak for other registries of record, but I can speak for NPM. We did an internal audit of our systems about a year ago, which have resulted in a pretty significant architectural redesign of the registry for the purpose of improving the overall security. Many of these things being things that would not show up in an external red team audit and would only come from like analyzing the architecture and seeing the way in which things are built. I'm trying not to share too many details about the specifics here, but I think you have an idea of where I'm leaning here.
Are you sorry, just a clarification question on this point? Are you saying was this audit performed by internal entities that understood the architecture, or was this an external firm that was given all of the information about this is how our architecture is, here's the source code, all of that, that allowed that to happen?
I think that's a loaded question, to be honest. And the reason why I'll say that is GitHub is big enough and NPM was acquired that even an internal team, it's kind of the same thing in my personal opinion. I understand like structurally it isn't. So these were all internal folks, but the folks who did the audit were people who did not have familiarity or hands-on experience with NPM. Our security experts who were given full access to the NPM source code and paired directly with the NPM engineers to come up with this solution. So it was entirely internal, but I think in many ways it looks like the way an external audit would. But I recognize that for the sake of like, a stamp or approval or compliance, it may not reach that bar, but that was what we were okay with. And we actually felt because of that structure, we could actually have something that was even more like hands-on. The reason why I mention this is not just to talk about the fact that we did this audit, but like the result of this audit is like a multi-quarter effort that is still ongoing to completely revamp like pretty much everything, and is taking almost the majority of our effort and engineering power beyond like a handful of feature things. Like when I said like we don't have the capacity to do something like OIDC after we've done this whole huge sprint around like MFA and a lot of stuff, it's because like we are so dedicated to doing like this work stream and getting this new architecture together. That's like been our primary focus. The reason why I mention this and in the context is I think that it's great for the OpenSSF to be pushing for and wanting to make improvements, but I do think that like it is making some assumptions about like what would be the best type of improvements for an organization, what they have, especially for the corporate entities, like what capacity they have to respond to something. So like if we were to do this right now, a red team would be engaging in the old architecture, which we already have like a whole bunch of stuff that we know about. We're not quite ready to do anything on the new architecture. And anything that was identified would kind of take away from this like concerted effort that we're already doing. And from where I'm sitting, it's like the options that I'm being presented, in my opinion, are like, play ball and get involved, or you're like a bad steward. Right? Like, and I'm not saying that that's the intent, but like, that's what I feel like the result could look like. And meanwhile, I'm saying like, no, like we already are so invested in like our security that we've made like a multi-year roadmap based on other findings that we've already done that we don't have the capacity to participate in this program today. I like that when you're talking about the public registries, you're coming with both like, we'll do the analysis and help with the repairs. I think that's table stakes and it really shouldn't be considered otherwise. But I do think that like there's I think there's kind of like a larger conversation to be had. And I think it's kind of akin to what Zach was saying around like, what are the organization's roadmaps right now? And is this type of engagement the top thing that they would prioritize? I would say, going back to your thesis, I think your original thesis that basically because they're cost centers, corporations are not going to invest in security. I actually think that's flawed. And I'm not trying, like, our entire roadmap, our entire funding is entirely about security for NPM because we take it so seriously. It's just this particular type of engagement is not what we've prioritized based on what we know internally. And so I think that there's a mismatch there that could result in, you know, like kind of like a conflict. I would be very disappointed, to be blunt, if NPM came across looking like a bad steward because we didn't want to engage in this program because we already have a funded security roadmap.
Yeah,
So,
no, I
have a,
go for it.
sorry, so I think based on what you're saying, Miles, what seems to make the most sense to me is to have the conversations with the package types first, like to get like, so there's like a checklist, like a verified checklist that says, okay, here are the requirements and here's what we're looking at. And this is what we need for you to participate in this program. If you check off all of these things already, because it's within your roadmap, you've already done it and you're making the steps necessary to be secure, you get the stamp of approval saying you've reached our level of whatever. I think that way it shows that the organization has actually talked to you to make sure that you're involved in this, that you've agreed that this is a good process and that you've shown that you're already making the steps to fulfill the requirements of what this whole process is about. So you wouldn't look like a bad steward. You would actually, you know, be like, thank you, but no, because here we are. And you get the stamp that says, yes, you've passed our checklist of verification that you're going to whatever. I think that that's something that definitely should be taken into account based on both what Miles and Zach said, because these are assumptions that we're making. I think they're good assumptions and could be holding true for the majority of some package types, but when individual package types are already taking care of things, then there needs to be a pass through, like a Credly badge or something, you know, that says, yeah, you're done, you know, something that shows up on the GitHub account that says, you know, OpenSSF, whatever, artifact repository, check, you know, something like that. Just an idea.
That's the rationale behind the proposal on the side of, if you have done the work, right? If you have spent the time to get that audit done, then great, that's wonderful. Like we don't need to spend money on you. That's spectacular. But can you, I mean, we don't need to send us the full thing. You can redact some of it, but can you present to us and publish, is it, you know, publish your pen test report that came out of the work that you did?
I should note this is in the discussions we've had in the SIG about the Great Artifact Repository Audit. One of the sort of the issues that I raised was the concern about husbanding the limited pool of goodwill that the OpenSSF has. We've already got folks who look at us as interlopers. That's my concern. I still think that in the long run, there will be social pressure to participate. I just don't think we need to start out with the stick. I think we can.
No, I agree. I just, you know, yeah, that's not.
I'll put it differently. I think at least in the first wave, we can just make it voluntary. Like we ask, can if you have a pen test, can you share some of it or share some aspect of it? But we're not going to sort of like, I don't think we should come out and say we asked and they said no. Like, I think that will burn goodwill. I wouldn't do that until later down the road, right? Once we've got a sort of like a track record of running these tests, because we're going to have to repeat the process periodically. Then we can consider like having the browbeating. But I see
I mean, I
Niels,
think-
you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm trying to kind of add something. I honestly like this. I mean, my first impression of this is like derailing something good for the benefit of, I don't know, having like a nice stamp of approval, I think, as it was just called. And I think it's absolutely good to offer this option to registries that need it and want it. And I think that's all this should be. It's an offer to anyone who doesn't otherwise have a way to pen test, or for whatever reason can't do this. And whoever doesn't need it has like thinks they've done enough internally, doesn't need to make use of this program. And I don't think, like, if you're just trying to, you know, improve some of these situations, you have to put your focus on the ones who don't need it. I think just, you know, build a program, speak to individual people. If there are enough repositories who actually want this audit to be performed, then great, just focus on those, work with them, and I think that's good enough.
I was gonna plus Niels and say let's walk before we run, before we say we're mandating this for every package registry of I don't know, some whatever threshold we determine. Let's just say, hey, this is something the OpenSSF is offering. Who's interested? Let's run this with a few registries, see what happens, and then from there determine how we want to increase the scope of the project.
I was just saying that I'm muted. I'm going to pile on really quickly with, I guess hearing this resonates with me. And I think what's happening, and you can push back if you disagree, it feels like a conflation of two things possibly. And one, as Nils put it, is a program that's about improving the security of individual registries. And the other is about like a compliance or security mandate for ensuring that registries are at a certain level or met a certain level. And it seems like the first program is kind of in service of the second program, because if we're going to start enforcing these things, then we need to do something to level the playing field or to allow folks to like meet that bar. So I do think that the first program seems like a no-brainer win and should just start running if we're able to fund it. And the second program is something that if it's split out and thought about separately, I would personally like to participate more in conversations to see what that means. And I think that if it's split from like, how are these things funded? How is it done? And it's mostly just about like, hey, what's the security min bar that we expect these kinds of things to meet? Almost like if we think about like ARIA or accessibility compliance, like we have accessibility scores and like you do these things, you get this score. I think like even having it as a binary, honestly, is probably setting up for a problem. But there's I think a lot of conversations to be had there about like, what should those levels of compliance be for registries? How could they meet them? What are the expectations? What are the ongoing expectations? And it would be a shame to allow like kind of that design to get in the way of like starting to do something that seems like it's already going to have like an ecosystem win, which is like go out and do these pen tests against registries that are ready for them. And if that undermines like the goal, like the ultimate goal, then probably it's worth more conversation. But from where I'm sitting as an outsider, it seems like there could be a big win in kind of like separating these and working on them independently.
So part of the vision behind this was, you know, coming up with a set of things that we want to see tested, right? And like a common set of things. So I think that's what you might be saying. Like, let's come up with a common set of things that we want to see tested by any of these audits. And for corporations, I said, we've already tested this stuff. They can, you know, sell the test or show us a pen test report and say, like, this is the stuff that got covered, stuff like that, something like that, right? But we want to try to come to a common understanding. And if they haven't, if a firm or an organization has not had this audit of the same tier done, talk to them about, you know, if it's a corporation, how can we get you to this point where you can also include this in your test? The other thing that I, you know, recognize is I spoke to some organizations and like, you know, we're kind of rating like $150,000 for a technology like pen test, right? Just for the pen test. That's a number that came from speaking to OSTIF as how much they've paid for audits. Now, I know there's a lot of organizations out there, corporations out there that may not be able to front that amount of money for an audit, even if they are corporations, right? To pay for it. So, because that's a pretty chunk of money. And I've spoken to some and they're like, yes, we can get a pen test done, but not for that much money, right? Like that's level of depth that we can't invest in. So that trying to come up with a list of items that we want, and then also, saying, well, we need this, we need more than what you've given us is potentially a part of this conversation that we're thinking about, that we may need to have too.
But I guess I'll come back to that compliance part. Like, to me, it sounds like a mismatch between like engagements and trying to do work in compliance. One example I'll throw out there is like accessibility. Like, and we're talking about levels of accessibility compliance of our product. We have internal counsel that review it and internal accessibility teams that sign off and then assign it a grade. We don't have necessarily like a third party like audit us, or someone that we need to show receipts to in the same way. To be honest, I'd have to go in and look more at like how that works. But these are the kind of things I would love to like poke at and understand and think like, how do we make something that isn't just even an open SSF thing, but could become like an industry standard for services? Like, how do we scale this really big? And I think we would have to look at the way in which like, current things work. There are other things around compliance that do have, like third-party audits. But I think that's a little bit different than like, show me that you got this thing done. Again, I guess, and I don't want to belabor the point, I personally feel like, hey, we want to go do pen tests. We want to go engage with you. If you want to opt out, you can opt out, is like a really clear win. And if you're going to take our funds to do it, then we'd like to see the results of it to like show that you're actually going to do something. That all seems very reasonable. But when we get into the like, hey, we want to put a stamp of approval on like organizations reaching a bar, I would love to have more conversation around what that looks like, about how we operationalize it, about what the expectations are, about like what the grades and levels would be. I think that there's a lot to unpack there.
So what I take from this conversation is that you'll all be coming to the next SIG meeting.
Yes, please.
So that we can discuss this further. I'm just keeping an eye on time. We have a few more issues to get through. One that's quite open-ended, which is Zach, you were asking about what would you say you do here?
Yeah, and none of these are particularly urgent or timely, maybe other than the Docker FYI. But the primary goal of that point was there's a couple of different options for what this group could be. It could be a forum by which different registries talk about best practices, learn from each other, request documentation be provided from other parties so that they can more effectively implement capabilities, etc. Or maybe more to Jonathan's point, it could be a way to try to establish common criteria, be that security or accessibility, and figure out ways to drive the ecosystem towards those common capabilities. And I know there's a lot of different systems represented here today on this call, and so I was sort of wondering, maybe sort of between those two extremes, if people are leaning more towards, we just want a forum by which to talk to other people who have similar jobs that we do at different places, or if people are more interested in sort of like picking specific capabilities and driving those forwards, or both, or something else entirely. And that might be hard to answer in 10 minutes, but generally speaking, that was what I was hoping to understand better.
In what I have observed over the past several months from this working group is a level of, it seems like a level of die-off in the attendance of the working group. It seems like it's a couple of core people and chain guard, right? Like a couple of package registries and chain guard. And so I would like to see this working group revitalized in a certain level, because it seems like there's a really important topic, and there's a lot of important information that could be shared between the different registries, including stuff like even like threat intel, right? Like, this is an attacker that we are seeing play out, across our spaces. And, hey, the thing is that a lot of attackers don't cross language boundaries. I don't think, I mean, I could be completely wrong. But that kind of information is really valuable. But I think that there does need to be a sort of a mission to encourage people or a set of things we're trying to deliver on to encourage people to keep showing up and coming to these meetings. And it's not just like, same old, same old. Jock?
I felt like the conversation we had earlier that was triggered by the PyPI MFA change was interesting, and it was a good example of cross-pollination, which is the topmost objective, although they're not in order in the repo. One that I wanted to highlight was that at the start, we established the principle that nothing the group does is binding. It's not a governing group. It can't announce a standard and require everybody to live up to it. Like, we can publish what we said, non-normative, non-binding recommendations on common schemas and descriptive documentation of experiences and best practices. And I still think that's the case. The thing that's really tricky is that anything past the sort of the casual engagement, the freewheeling, open-ended conversations that we have is difficult because everybody's busy. This is the universal problem of the OpenSSF. Everybody's got shit to do. So it's difficult to carve out bandwidth from a bunch of different people simultaneously to work on something. What I'm really excited about with the great audit, the great artifact repository audit, is that it proposes to assign full-time people to work on this, to take the burden off the shoulders of maintainers who have so much to do already. Especially the part where we're tying together remediation with inspection. All of which is to say, it has gotten quieter. I think basically a lot of conversations that we had earlier on sort of like came to a natural conclusion. Like, folks share their experiences and there wasn't much update. I think the repository audit has a great opportunity to revitalize discussion, certainly around that area, especially as we discover commonalities. We may discover particularly architectural questions are in common. But I'm not sort of super worried at the moment about the mix of discussion and topics. I think we're more or less in line with what we wanted to do. I do wish more people turned up more regularly, but short of having, like a cabaret show to entice the punters, I'm not sure what I would recommend there. So this concludes your ramble for the day.
I like documenting things, and so if there are things that people want to see documented from GitHub, NPM, or other package managers, that's another topic I'd be interested in. It's the right sort of bite size too, where it's not like delivering a net new security capability, but it's something that can be done in a week or two. I don't want to call on folks, but we do have a lot of package managers represented here today, and especially if we haven't heard from you yet on this call, I would love to hear if there's something particular that you want to see more of, less of, etc.
I'll be really quick so that we can adhere to your ask of people you haven't heard from yet. But one of the things that I've really enjoyed about this group, and I'll admit my personal attendance has waned as of late, but is having a group of folks who are working on the same problem set, that we can have like very honest dialogue and the occasional back channel. I can see a couple of people on the call right now without like calling people out, who I've had private calls with from these calls where we discuss in depth, like some of the things that just you can't talk about publicly generally, and you can't necessarily share. At GitHub, we've spent a lot of time and money on researching like account recovery or processes and policies. And this has allowed me to like share that knowledge with folks who maybe would have had to have done it themselves, and to make sure that we're not duplicating effort. So I think that there is a lot of value there in just creating the connections and making, those channels for discussion, even if it's not like, by some sort of means of authority.
In the past, I have when I have worked for a package maintainer, when we have had a security incident, I have reached out to people at GitHub for we're having an incident. We don't have the resources for this. Help. Like, you know, and then I've had people show up from GitHub and jump on calls and be like, here's how to deal with this incident that you're actively going through as a package maintainer. So having those people that you can reach out to privately in this space is, you know, I found those connections privately before this group existed, but please, I mean, you know, within the bounds of what your corporate life lets you tell other people, these people can help you with, you know, my world's on fire, I need help, sort of, you know, connections.
Or even just our world's been on fire too, and we get it and it sucks.
I want to make sure we don't miss Zach's call to action, which was to hear from some folks we haven't heard from, since we have about 4 minutes left.
I'd love to hear from the, and not to call people out, but I'd love, because JFrog, right? You guys touch every single ecosystem in the industry, and there's 3 of you here. Like, what about this working group entices you all to you know, 3 people dedicated from a single company dedicated to a single, this call is a lot of resources. What is enticing you guys to be a part of this conversation here?
So as far as Content Center is concerned, I'm only representing the technical side of the C++ repository. So as a unit on itself, and Larry can probably add more for the rest. Laura, you there? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. So I think for us, because we do touch everything, we need to know what's going on. And I think, you know, part of the issue that we all have is when we have an update is getting to the right people to make sure that they know what's going on. And we had, you know, some issues when we deprecated JCenter, or not JCenter, I'm sorry, Bintray. And basically, we don't want to lose anybody. We don't want to get anybody lost. And we want to make sure that we're in the conversation to make sure we can make things work right on our end if something were to happen, to make sure that we're on the right track in terms of policies, compliance, all of that kind of stuff, and just get to know the maintainers. So if there's something happening within a package type, we can make sure we address it head on. I think the big thing that I've realized across the board in tech is communication is the hardest thing and it's the most important thing. So if there's an update to NPM and we don't know about it and all of a sudden artifacts are gone missing or something, it's because we weren't aware, and Miles's team might have sent an email to the wrong person that doesn't work here anymore or something like that. So I think that's our main goal of getting more involved in community working groups and SIGs like this, is to make sure that we're able to handle anything that happens down the pipeline and then lead our recommendations as well, that we think, you know, based on our experience, what could help move things forward. I don't mean to speak for you, Zohar, or for Adam, but that's just kind of why I think that we're here in big numbers.
You totally nailed it. It's exactly why we're here.
Totally.
All right, we're just coming up on the hour now. Unfortunately, we didn't get to discuss the fundable question or look at the attestations, but we can pick those up next week. I think they're also useful reading as well. I really like the PyPI fundables idea. It's great. So the next meeting will be at the APAC time, which is for those of us on the East Coast of the US or North America, really, will be at 6 p.m., I think. Yeah. Oh, I'm not sure. Anyway, it's on the calendar. You get the idea. There's also, as I noted, the SIG, which is looking at the artifact audit. I think it's definitely something that spurred a lot of discussion today. So I hope to see you all again at the next SIG call, which I believe is next week at this time, but I would have to check the calendar to be sure.
Yes, it is. Yes. Yeah. It's the same bad time, same bad place, you know, every week. Yep.
And we've all just dated ourselves with that reference.
A quick call out before we break. I don't know if we've recently done a survey to like reevaluate the times. But the current
Mm.
times just like do not work for me, which is part of the reason why I haven't been able to come. And I'm not saying like, hey, change the times just so I can come, but I'm sure there's others who may be feeling the same way, especially when there's many new folks. So I'd like to advocate for maybe a survey or something for timings, and maybe we should reevaluate the times since there's so many new faces.
I was about to say you should bring that up at the next meeting, but that's kind of like a circular problem. There is a mailing list. Can you bring that issue up on the mailing list for us? And I can find out how you create one of the doodle polls, and we can try to figure that out.
It's just creating a doodle poll with your availability, and then there's no OpenSF specific way of doing it. Just somebody creates a doodle poll with these are the slots that are available. Go.
Okay. Well,
I have
thank
to
you for
drop,
volunteering,
y'all.
Miles. Yep. All right.
Sorry,
Let's wrap it
y'all.
up,
Thanks.
folks. It's been
Bye.
great. We'll see you again soon.
Yep.